of sustainability is, um, and the threats to our the survival of the planet have become a major cause of um, public action over a period of time. Um, I thought I'd use one or two statements made by people I used to admire a long time. I was living in Sweden when Mrs. Brundtland was the Prime Minister of Norway in the late 80s. And she was a physician um, who became the Environment Minister of Norway and then eventually also served as the Director General of the World Health Organization and headed the newly constituted UN Commission on Environment, which was eventually called the Brundtland Commission. And the report that he published at the time, it was called the Brundtland Commission Report or the Brundtland Report, titled Our Common Future. Now, some great environmentalists preceded her, and E.F. Schumacher was one of them. He used to be the chairman of the British National Coal Board, and authored another iconic book called Small is Beautiful. So many of you in a different age may have been familiar with this. So my generation of youngsters were inspired by books written by men like Schumacher. So pathbreaking, and even the books that came posthumously in 1991, 92 onwards, remarkable fodder for one's imagination and extraordinary intellectual companionship. I've not seen anything written like that in the decades to come. But what she said about sustainability is very meaningful because it has continued to guide public institutions for a long time and set the agenda for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Kofi Annan was the Secretary General at the time, and during the time that he was there, the UN Global Compact was set up for the first time, and the Sustainable Development Goals were codified, academies constituted, and an attempt made to lead both private institutions and also the central banks of the world to see how do we drive sustainability goals through 200 countries in the world, every member of the United Nations. That was a very major attempt made by Kofi Annan at the time. What she said was, in a summary form, is that sustainability is about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own. So it was challenging the notion that material that we use, minerals that we use, it could be coal or mica or it could be aluminum or whatever, then there is a limitless, inexhaustible supply of this under the earth's crust, and we can continue to consume our way to economic growth. And we could be, there's no limit to consumption, and we are all driven by high growth rates in our economic development. So we celebrate 10% average growth rate in GDPs, and we are constantly chasing those growth numbers. And we think that something is wrong when that growth doesn't happen. We celebrate economies that grow like that. And often enough, that growth comes at extraordinary price. We challenge the fairness of it. So can the West stop us from growing after they have grown to $60,000 to $50,000 per capita GDP? Can you stop a country like India at $2,500 per capita GDP to stop growing? So there's no fairness to it. Even within the same country, we fought many different types of battles. There are some 5% of the population is at $70,000 per capita GDP. And there's a large proportion of the population which is not at that. So we challenge the fairness of all these equations, but they exist. And alarmed by this seductive these growth rates and the consequences it has for environment, the Brundtland Commission report was the first one that actually said we should codify this and find a way to many different kinds of initiatives that need to be done. We'll get into that next. So if you go to the next one, please. Why sustainability is so important now, so critical to our times? There are growing consequences of climate change and unabated global warming. At the time, they said that they must limit the, the gross temperature rise across the planet to about 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-modernization. So they took some temperature benchmarks of 150 years ago or so, before industrialization really took off, and they said that the Earth can't take temperature rises above 1.5 degrees Celsius from that benchmark. Whatever we see now is at about 2.9, okay, and it still seems to be growing. We've not slowed it down. We'll come to that in a minute. And there are consequences for low-lying countries. There are many countries which can be submerged in no time at all. Many cities can disappear. There's another dimension to this, which is that global income and wealth inequities are unabated. It's continuing. Okay. By the time we went from $1,800 to $2,500, I know many economies have gone from $35,000, $40,000 per capita GDP to $65,000, $70,000 at a national level, if you were to compare. Less than 10% of the world's population lives in the G7. And they still account for nearly 40% of the energy consumed. And then there are inequities. We'll come to that in a minute. And the energy hunger. If you see on China, by the time China and India, if India goes to $10,000 per capita GDP, we will be all up in flames. The world will be up in flames. If you aspire to Viksit Bharat in 2047, I can't even imagine what a nation like this will look like. It's hard to, if you hit $10,000, then I think this country is up in flames. This is what we are confronting. We don't know how we are not looking at all the consequences of every plan we put together. This is the first point to bear in mind. Our continued dependence on fossil fuels. So the only little change is in parts of Europe has shifted to natural gas, CNG, nuclear power, and so forth. From conventional coal, there's never any lignite. But they got rid of coal also in many places. Entire businesses disappeared. When we talk about resilience, I was mentioning about Chorus Steel, which Tata has acquired 15 years, 17 years ago. We paid 22, 23 billion pounds for that acquisition. And we had to shut it down because the European Union would not permit. 3 years or 2 years after Chorus Steel was acquired, the European Union said that you cannot use coal of this grade in the blast furnaces. That's the end of it. Story ended. And over time, we made promises to the then Prime Minister that we would not fire people. And what that could mean. So there are massive consequences to businesses as a result of this. Coal is still made in countries like India. I mean, wrought iron or ingots are made here. Sheet steel still come from countries like us in South Korea, where actually many other businesses. So many things actually. Businesses that are shipped here, forgings, castings, also leather chemicals, a whole range of things are here, but not there in the West anymore. All right. This fondness for consumption, the measure of your evolution is still how much you consume of everything. It's not slowing down in every respect, even our food habits. As GDP growth rates increase, our consumption of meat per capita goes up dramatically and in linear fashion, as a case in point. And to produce to produce 100 calories in meat takes the expense of 500-700 calories in grain. Okay. And those linearities haven't gone away. They're still there. Vietnam was a rice-eating nation, but today it's highest per capita meat consumption. And what that could mean in terms of grain production, because you have to feed the animal that you wish to eventually eat, and so it loses calories in metabolism, in the growth of skin and bone and things that you won't eat. And the conversion process is so damn inefficient that you actually are ending up so the earth can't take this. In everything, we see that the consumption patterns haven't changed. So Schumann said that materialism and relentless consumption does not fit into the world. Why? Because it contains within itself no limiting principle. There's never an end. But the environment in which it is placed is strictly limited. This is the fundamental dichotomy. Everyone wants to grow, everyone wants to have $70,000 per capita GDP, and there's a price. The earth can't take it. The world is simply not in a position to take it. But there's an old analogy that people tell you, so the future comes one day at a time. We grow old every hour we are alive. So we don't watch, we're not alert to how we arrive into old age or into problems. We're not alert to it. Right? So that little frog put into cold water, put it on a stove, it gets used to, if you put it into that new environment of boiling water, it jumps out. Now we don't know. That's exactly what is going on with environment and sustainability to us. That's precisely what is going on. So we don't know. So okay, move on. Next slide. So reflecting on the debates in the COP29 and the preceding COP. COP is the United Nations sponsored dialogues between national leaders on how we would approach particularly issues of financing and legislation in environment. So the last one was in Azerbaijan or Baku or someplace. And when you see the debates there, then you understand what David Suzuki was saying. That we are in a giant car which is heading towards a brick wall, and everyone's arguing about where to sit. We're all going to get blown up. So this is a wrong argument. We'll come to that again in a little bit. And so Kofi Annan was the person who, at the time, and amongst his friends was Mr. Ratan Tata. And we were amongst the Tata companies in this country, along with the public sector undertakings, many of the central PSUs, were among the first ones to sign up to the Human Global Compact. That required you to monitor some 16, 17 critical goals, or 10 goals, I stand corrected on this. I think the number of development goals were about 17 or so, but I think the number of principles were 9 or 10 in the Human Global Compact. We were all signatories to it, earliest ones. And that's attributed to this person. So, am I audible?
Yeah, now. I'll give you one more mic.
So he was saying the whole global compact movement was how do we convert these very necessary, not just desirable, necessary outcomes that or industry initiatives. How do we convert them from ideas to action plans? Train large numbers of people, set realistic goals, have monitoring mechanisms of various kinds. So working with Institute of Chartered Accountants, you can say that, okay, when a company seeks listing on a stock exchange in the New York, in NYSE, let's say, then I would expect you to also publish a report on your progress on these sustainability goals, exactly, on these global compact principles. I'll take a couple of examples and tell you about that, what I witnessed in my time in finance in the course of time. But there is the first attempt to systematically set standards. Sorry. Sorry. So very concerted and a very well thought through attempt to pull together diverse professions to set those standards and find frameworks in which companies around the world could fall in line and report on what they're doing about some of these things. So they cover a wide spectrum because one consequence of this relentless pursuit of consumption is a sharper, more pronounced divides between countries and communities in terms of wealth and income. And those inequities also are not fair to many people who are left behind from progress. This is a very important challenge that we were facing is with wealth increase of a nation, income disparities between people is also expanding. It's world over. That's what we are noticing that the income disparity and the wealth disparity sharpens as the wealth of a nation increases. Okay. So it's only in the Scandinavian countries where you're taxing like there's no tomorrow. In those welfare societies, you find that maximum marginal taxation has gone up to 50% or more or something of that order. Only in those places, by you consciously drive this. Otherwise, income inequity sharpens with increase in wealth. This is a very sad part of the story. So there were also many points within the UN Global Compact that address the matter. Go to the next one. So the entire focus is how do you report? Now I'm Starbucks, okay? And on the face of it, it's just coffee being sold at various retail outlets. But if you take the same HR idea, the ideas in human resources, and that you have some control over, you may be procuring coffee from various parts of the world. Colombian coffee, Brazilian coffee, Indian, Sri Lankan. Sri Lanka doesn't know, not known for coffee, but at least some of these major coffee markets, you get coffee from everywhere. So when you look behind and look at the supply chain, you want to see whether the sourcing of this coffee has been on a principled basis. Did it pay fairly? Is child labor being used on those coffee estates? Is there income disparity between men and women? Is gender equality in those places? I have to be in every coffee estate from where coffee is procured by Starbucks and not go by hearsay or what the company or the producer is telling me, the farm community is telling me, but I have to verify that it is indeed the case. And forwards, if you see, applying the same principle into thousands of outlets in hundreds of countries. Is child labor being used? Are fair wages being paid? If there is in the coffee outlets, okay, are the same principles of equal wages for both genders and other forms of equity being established? That's what they have to report. Now, you have, let's say, 50,000 outlets. I'm just throwing a number, I don't know how many Starbucks outlets are there, but if you have a certain number of outlets, the report requires you to name and show that this is indeed the case. Now, that would apply to a Maruti Udyog or whoever else. It doesn't matter which part of the world you are in. But that's what the Global Compact required. So much of what we see here, each one of those principles, or 17 principles, there was a reporting mechanism that had to be set up. There were a number of such reporting frameworks which evolved over time. Just go to the next one. There are various reporting standards. The triple bottom line reporting, the global reporting initiative of the GRI, ISO has come up with a bunch of standards. Lead for green buildings, carbon disclosure projects, number of frameworks have evolved over a period of time. On reporting how you have been performing, you can adopt any one of them. You don't need to necessarily stay confined to Global Compact. But some of those are accounting standards. Not this. Okay. But the UN Global Compact is by far the most systematic in that because they've set up the academies. There's a lot of hand-holding that goes into it. LEED certification is It's not just constructing new buildings, but it's how do you convert existing buildings into green buildings. So the big, which is also called the Clinton project, because during his time, Bill Clinton, and after his retirement, he spent enormous amount of money from the foundation set up in his name for LEED certification of existing buildings. Move on to the other. A lot of what we have said in the UN Global Compact project actually comes under these 3 or 4 main heads. The attempts at conservation, the soil, energy, raw materials, water, land, it's not sand, sorry about that. Food, knowledge, human health and dignity. How do you conserve? How do you guarantee, assure, secure under all circumstances? You take community, that's again a typo. I wrote it in great hurry in the middle of the night just to make sure that something comes up on the screen. So apologies for that. But under community, what I meant was that there is the objective is to achieve all that, and the methods are those. So human rights and fair labor practices are a very important dimension. Inclusivity, preservation of cultural heritage, education. So those are all objectives. And the methods of philanthropy and volunteering, partnership, etc. All of those. But on environment, it is what they call circularity. And the circularity idea, very as opposed to linearity. Linear economy is endless growth. You throw resources and you get growth. You throw resources. It's a very linear approach. But circularity is a very different one because it challenges you to reuse. I remember that during my college days in McGill in Canada, we came across the first time I heard about circularity in those days. That's a long time ago, I can tell you that. So these are not new ideas. Alcan, the aluminum company of Canada, it started to lease aluminum. So, okay, you are a Pepsi, you buy aluminum cans from me, or you may be Ford Motor Company, you buy aluminum for new age aluminum engine blocks, lighter or aluminum alloys that you use in various ways. Now, what would it do? Alcan would give you aluminum on lease, and you say 70% of that will be returned in 10 years, and 75% in 11 years, and so on and so forth. And 100% of aluminum, or 90% of aluminum comes back to me in 15 years. If you are Pepsi, I expect you to return as much aluminum as you are buying from me by actually making sure that the cans come back and I'm able to recycle the can. Because the production of aluminum is one of the most energy intensive products. Took aluminum from ore to alumina, from alumina to aluminum ingots is an exceptionally energy intensive process. It's only when you have hydro energy in abundance that you can actually make aluminum. So you cannot make it everywhere. So you're near Hyderabad, you will have an Utkal aluminum as a case in point or something like that. So if you're not having access to hydropower, so these are extremely energy intensive processes. And there, circularity is established in various ways. In every business you can think of, there is an element of that circularity that comes back. Circularity as opposed to linearity, which is characterized by this, what they normally use, this terminology called take, make, and dispose approach, which is characteristic of the linear economy. So what it demands is really innovation in technology and in operating models, how companies have to be run in order that, you say zero emission, zero and highest levels of recycling, and actually start to report what are we doing in terms of model innovations. So the pressure on the earth. I remember that many of the oil companies, mining companies, so do overcast mines, then how do I make sure that after the mining in a particular area or a zone is complete, how can I make sure that the land is restored to normalcy? You return land to nature after ravaging it for 30, 40, 50 years and you mine everything out. How do I return that land to nature? to the pristine quality in which it was found when I first started mining in the day. Example. So like this, I must restore it to the condition in which I found it. I must restore it to the condition in which I found it. Timber maker, people who make furniture like IKEA, for instance, as a case in point. So how do I do harvesting of forest produce in such a manner that I never will have less than so much acreage under cultivation? So I only remove 1/10 because the time taken to cultivate this is 10 years. So each year, if I take only 1/10 of it, whatever happens, then I know that the circularity is established. So they would come up with ideas and principles of this nature. The gentleman there is from ITC and Bhadrachalam paper boards has been an extraordinary case of pioneering elementary chlorine-free paper, that ECF was started, I think, in India by Bhadrachalam. So I know many initiatives of this nature have taken place in India. But that's the circularity of that is established. The next. So there are a number of these. I just mentioned a couple of them as talking points on that. So the innovations in industry to build resilience have been around how you finance climate change. How do we finance climate change? That was the central preoccupation of most of the COP conversations also. Do we tax those who are directly producing and using fossil fuels? So the production of fossil fuels are oil companies, mining companies, all these various kinds of companies. So taxing them, making them expensive, putting reversing the gear on utilization. So the ones who use and the ones who produce, both of them start to be taxed. And that money to be taken out to part finance clean energy. That was the whole idea behind it. So you would tax. It was never enough. So taxation has been one major driver in the past, but now more direct involvement, especially LDCs. So the least developed or the less developed countries, the 47, 48, or the poorest countries in the world, they want to be given a helping hand to make a transition from cheap fossil fuel based energy to more expensive renewable energy. Okay, so the financing of energy transition, energy source transition from expensive fossil fuels to cheap, from less expensive fossil fuel based energy to more expensive alternatives is one critical debate. On how do we help them? But they will blow up the planet if you're not careful. They will continue to consume. If India has not helped, if China has not helped, there's a problem there. Okay? In terms of making the big transition. So all of those carbon taxes are on this. And carbon credits, this is another idea which we are battling on how to actually do trading of these credits. So everyone cannot make the transition to, see, I can't, if I'm a steel producer, I can't stop using coal for my furnaces in an instant. It will take time to make the transition. So there are realistic limits set. And if I accelerate and I'm able to achieve a higher growth in, or I reduce faster than the goals set, I get credits. And that credit translates into money. That's an incentive. And somebody else who's still polluting is paying a price because he has to buy the credits to survive in the business. So those who are working harder than expected are given a credit, and those who are working slower and doing less have to pay a price. So that's the credit system, and there are agencies set for trading credits in the Western world. We still haven't gone that far. We're not that aggressively monitoring the credit system here. But they are doing this in the Western world. So a number of those kinds of interventions have been designed to, in fact, there is we've overdone environmental legislation. So created a myriad of legislation that starts to confuse us so much. It's unbelievable. There's so much legislation around these kinds of ideas. And how governments, development banks, if you take an African Development Bank or Asian Development Bank or the BRICS Bank, the International Bank for Investment and Infrastructure in Beijing, some of these big banks are all having large plans on large lending windows to make a transition. So we collect capital from the member countries and then we give the money to be able to make the transition. So this is a very critical part of the whole journey towards sustainability that we don't use up. And new ideas, there's several path-breaking ideas. You see, when we produce energy, some energy in large quantities cannot be stored. You produce and you have to use it because there's no other option. But there are countries that convert wind energy on high seas into desalination plants, move it there and to convert it into clean water. Example. Okay, so that the energy you can store it at an altitude in a hydro dam, or you can convert wind energy which you can't keep in batteries. Okay, so what do you do with it? So you actually use it for things like this desalination plants. It's starting to happen in a large number in terms of how do you make those balances a reality. Just move on, I guess. Next one, please. There's also a lot of debate around individuals. So this is some of you have not read Michael Sandel. I think it's one of the most extraordinary thinkers of modern times on matters. They call it political philosophy, but in Harvard, I think he's nearing retirement. But Michael Sandel wrote some extraordinary books. I would strongly recommend it, such at least the youngsters who are there. There are not too many students around here, but he questioned the individual, what our obligations are for the unborn, the people to come. Okay, and how deep are they? Are they greater than the ones, the obligations we carry for those who are our contemporaries on earth? And how far can you think? Can they sort out their problems when they come here, eventually when they are born and when they grow older and they get smarter? Do we carry an obligation to preserve anything? This is a very Western debate. You know, in an I, me, myself world, the winner takes it all, that's the world that we are living in. And that world, these questions come up very often. So the intergenerational obligations are not recognized. My obligation to those who left, my obligations to those who are yet to come. And so these are intergenerational. Do we carry them? Do we have them? And what are they? It's a very important debate because then I don't take personal accountability for anything. I can do whatever I want to. It's a finite life. We believe in karmic cycles. We think that people come back. And that we are never completely gone until we merge with Narayana. They don't think so. You say you enter the grave and you sleep there forever. So there is a big difference in how we think and how they think. One reason why they say that if you don't believe in reincarnation, there's a problem. This is a very oriental statement of a Japanese immigrant into North America, right? You know, the way we see the world shapes the way we treat it. If a mountain is a deity, not a pile of ore. If a forest is a sacred grove, not timber. If other species, not spices, I'm sorry about this. I don't know who typed it, but in my office somebody I did. If other species are biological kin and not resources to exploit. So we are a nation which worships cows and we worship even snakes during Nagavali in places like we think that the animal kingdom, they are all our biological kin. Till you visit an abattoir, a slaughterhouse in the West, then you will give up. Because they don't think so. It's a resource, it's something to be eaten. Right? Well, the planet Earth is our mother, not an opportunity. We treat each other a little differently. I said that because I think there is a very important philosophical difference between how we think in the Oriental world, even now. Notwithstanding all the exposure to Western cultures, we still are very different. Before we go on. Okay, next one. There's a lot we can say about the practice of minimalism and simplicity. What is the source of the, let's say simplicity is the highest sophistication. That, that simplicity is the keynote of all true elegance. So us again, I mean, I think that in our rush to become a developed nation, we must not forget that well, for hundreds of years we practiced it and believed in it very fervently. No longer, unfortunately, at least in the big cities, in the big companies, we've forgotten. So this is a very important one. That the source of happiness is tranquility and occupation, not how much you possess. And if you have forgotten that, there's a problem. That we will rush. We'll also, in our bid to become Viksit Bharat in 2047, I don't know what we might end up doing. Unless we're very careful with what we do with money. If we bring equity with it, okay, and we live in harmony with nature, so we're careful about where we spend and what. And I think this is a very important requirement. I'll stop there because I can just continue, but I thought maybe we can throw it open for some discussion and debate.
It's open for Q&A session. Q&A session.
Good evening, sir. It was a wonderful session, sir. First, I would like to appreciate it. My question is, what role does the technology